It was supposed to be a quick stop. The woman walked into the bank on a sunny afternoon, wearing a crisp navy blazer and carrying a small leather folder tucked under her arm. Her steps were calm, steady, and confident, but there was something in her eyes, something that hinted she had seen and lived through far more than an ordinary person. People waiting in line noticed her immediately, not because she made a scene, but because she carried herself like someone who was used to being in control, someone who had purpose. Still, no one could have guessed how the next few minutes would turn the entire bank upside down. The branch manager was behind the counter, pretending to be busy with paperwork, but his eyes followed her closely from the moment she entered. There was a flicker of suspicion in his expression, though he couldn't have explained why. Maybe it was because she walked with such quiet certainty, or maybe it was because of the way she scanned the room like she was measuring every exit and every angle. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But in his mind, she didn't belong here. The woman approached the counter and spoke softly to the teller, sliding the folder forward. The teller flipped it open, then glanced toward the manager, a hint of nervousness in her eyes. She whispered something he couldn't quite hear, and that was enough for his suspicions to solidify. Within seconds he was convinced something wasn't right. Without saying a word to the woman, he stepped into his office and picked up the phone. The call was short. His voice was low but urgent. "Yes, I need someone here right away. I think we've got a situation." Out in the lobby, the woman waited patiently, her gaze fixed on nothing in particular. People behind her shifted uncomfortably, sensing that something strange was happening. No one knew that the manager had just contacted the FBI. When the sound of tires screeching outside broke the stillness, the atmosphere inside the bank changed instantly. A black SUV rolled to a stop in front, and in moments the glass doors swung open. 3 agents walked in, dark suits, earpieces, their presence pulling everyone's attention. Conversations fell silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning and the muted thud of shoes against the marble floor. The bank manager stepped forward eagerly, as if expecting praise for calling them. "That's her," he said in a hushed but excited tone, pointing directly at the woman. "She's the one." Heads turned toward her. A customer gasped quietly. The teller bit her lip. The woman didn't move. She simply looked up at the approaching agents with calm, steady eyes, as though she'd been expecting this moment. The lead agent stopped right in front of her. His expression was unreadable. For a long, tense second, no one spoke. It felt like the entire building was holding its breath. Then, in a voice that was low but carried authority, the agent said, "Ma'am, may I see your identification?" Without hesitation, she reached into her blazer, pulled out a badge, and placed it in his hand. The moment his eyes landed on it, something shifted. His posture straightened even more, and then, in front of the stunned bank employees and customers, he clicked his heels together and gave her a sharp salute. Gasps rippled through the room. The other agents followed his lead, their movements crisp and respectful. The manager's face drained of color, his mouth opening but no words coming out. People began whispering, confused and curious. Why were federal agents saluting the very woman they had been called to arrest? The woman didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply gave a slight nod to the agents, her eyes never leaving the manager's face. "Is there a problem here?" she asked quietly, her voice steady but carrying an unmistakable weight. The agents exchanged glances, as though they all knew something that no one else in the bank did. The lead agent turned to the manager, his voice suddenly cold. "You might want to explain yourself, sir." By now, everyone in the bank was watching. Even the customers who had been fidgeting impatiently moments ago were frozen in place, their eyes darting between the manager, the agents, and the mysterious woman. Whatever was happening, it was far bigger than a misunderstanding at a bank counter. The manager stammered. I didn't know who she was. I just thought." His voice trailed off under the woman's gaze, which was calm yet piercing enough to make him shrink back. One of the customers leaned toward another and whispered, "Who is she?" But the answer didn't come. The tension was thick, the air heavy with unanswered questions. The lead agent handed the badge back to the woman, his tone respectful. "We'll take it from here." But even as he said it, there was no sign of handcuffs, no hint of an arrest. Instead, they seemed to be waiting for her lead, as if she was the one in charge. The manager swallowed hard, realizing he had made a mistake. A big one, but it was already too late. The woman took a slow step forward, the agents falling in behind her, and the entire bank seemed to part like water as she walked. Nobody knew yet why the FBI agents had treated her like a superior officer, or what power she held that could turn a situation from a near arrest to a scene of formal respect. But the look on her face said that whatever she was here for was not finished. She stopped at the center of the lobby, turned slightly, and glanced over her shoulder at the manager. "You should be very careful about the assumptions you make," she said, her voice still low but now laced with something colder. The agent's eyes flickered toward the door, as if expecting someone, or something else to arrive. The woman adjusted the folder in her hand, her grip firm, and gave a brief signal with 2 fingers. The agents nodded, their movements precise, almost rehearsed. Every person in the room could feel it now. Something big was about to happen. The air was charged with the kind of tension that comes before a storm. Customers glanced at the door, wondering who else might walk in. The manager stood frozen, his earlier confidence completely gone. And then, just as quickly as they had entered, the woman and the agents began moving toward the exit. She didn't look back again, but her words seemed to hang in the air long after she was gone. The moment the door closed behind them, the bank erupted in hushed voices. People were asking each other what they had just witnessed, why the FBI had saluted her, and whether the manager was in trouble. But no one had answers. The truth was still out there, waiting to be revealed. And for the manager, the most terrifying thing wasn't what had happened. It was the gnawing feeling that this wasn't over. Whatever that woman had come for, she would be back. For a long moment after the door shut, the bank felt strangely hollow. The sound of the woman's heels on the marble floor seemed to echo even after she had left. Customers shuffled their feet, whispering to one another, their eyes darting between the still-shaken manager and the teller who looked like she just swallowed her own tongue. The air was thick with unanswered questions. The manager tried to busy himself with papers on the counter, but his hands trembled too much to hold the pen steady. He could still see her face in his mind, calm, controlled, with a kind of quiet authority that made him feel like a child caught doing something wrong. He didn't understand what had just happened. He had called the FBI expecting them to escort her out in handcuffs, and instead they had treated her like she was their superior. In the far corner of the bank, an older man with silver hair leaned against his cane, still watching the door. He had been silent through the entire scene, but now his eyes narrowed as though he recognized something the others didn't. When the teller asked if he needed anything else, he shook his head without looking away. Outside, the black SUV idled for a moment before rolling away, the woman in the passenger seat with her gaze fixed ahead. The agents didn't speak. They didn't need to. Whatever mission she was on wasn't something for small talk. Her folder rested on her lap, her fingers tapping against it in a slow, steady rhythm. Back inside the bank, a young woman in line scrolled through her phone, her thumbs moving quickly as she typed out a message. She had filmed part of what happened, though not all. The clip was already uploading to social media, her caption reading, "This just happened at my bank. FBI saluting a random woman. Does anyone know who she is?" Within minutes, comments began flooding in. Some claimed they knew her. Others insisted it had to be a case of mistaken identity. A few suggested something bigger: government work, military clearance, secret operations. But no one had proof. The manager excused himself and slipped into his office, closing the door. He needed to think. He opened his laptop and began typing her description into a search engine. Black woman, late 30s to early 40s, tall, professional, FBI salute. Dozens of unrelated results appeared, none matching her exactly. But one article caught his attention. An old news piece about a decorated federal agent who had gone off-grid several years ago after an undisclosed operation overseas. There was no photograph, only a vague description that felt uncomfortably close to the woman who had just stood in his lobby. He sat back in his chair, heart thumping. Could that have been her? And if it was, why was she here in his bank, talking to one of his tellers about an account that didn't even appear in their standard system? At the same time across town, the black SUV pulled into an unmarked building with mirrored windows. The agent stepped out first, scanning the area before opening her door. She walked inside without a word, heading down a dimly lit hallway to a private office. Inside, a man in a gray suit stood waiting, his hands clasped behind his back. "You made contact," he said, not as a question but as a statement. She set the folder on the desk between them. "The account is real, but it's not under the name we expected." His jaw tightened. "Who's holding it?" She didn't answer right away, her eyes drifting toward the window as though measuring the distance between herself and the street outside. Someone who shouldn't be. Back at the bank, the silver-haired man with the cane finally moved toward the door. He paused by the counter, leaning slightly toward the teller. "Young lady," he said quietly, "did she give you a name?" The teller hesitated, glancing toward the manager's closed office door. I don't think I'm supposed to." He gave her a small, reassuring smile. "Sometimes the right thing isn't the same as the safe thing. Think about that." Then he pushed open the glass door and stepped into the sunlight. The day outside looked the same as it had that morning, but for some people it wasn't the same at all. The woman's presence had left an invisible ripple in their lives, especially for the manager, who kept replaying the scene in his mind, searching for clues in the smallest details. That night he couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house felt louder than usual. Every passing car drew his attention to the window. He told himself he wasn't afraid, but the truth was, he didn't know if she was finished with him. And deep down he suspected she wasn't. Somewhere else in the city, in a quiet apartment above a laundromat, a young man sat at his desk staring at his phone. The viral clip of the bank scene had reached him, and his hands shook as he replayed it. He knew that woman. He hadn't seen her in years, but he knew her. More importantly, he knew what she was capable of. And if she was back, it meant something was happening, something that could pull him into a world he had tried to leave behind. The comments on the video kept multiplying, strangers trying to piece together who she was. Some users claimed she was part of a high-level government task force. Others swore she was a whistleblower. A few insisted she wasn't even American. But no one could agree, and the mystery only made the story spread faster. By morning, news outlets had begun to pick it up, their headlines cautious but curious. "Unidentified woman gains FBI respect in bank confrontation," one read. Another asked, "Who is the mystery woman the FBI saluted?" The manager read the headlines over breakfast, the knot in his stomach tightening. He didn't like being part of this story. The more attention it got, the more likely it was that someone would ask questions he didn't want to answer. Questions about why he had called in the first place, and what exactly he thought she had done wrong. In a quiet office across town, the woman flipped through the contents of the folder again. Bank statements, coded numbers, and a single sheet with a handwritten note. "Find it before they do." She closed the folder and took a slow breath. She knew the manager would be rattled. She knew the customers would talk. That was fine. It was all part of the plan. But what she couldn't predict was how many people would start looking for her once the video spread. And some of those people, she didn't want finding her. Outside the bank 2 days later, a black sedan parked across the street. The man inside wasn't from the FBI. He wasn't a customer either. He sat quietly, watching the front doors, his hand resting on the steering wheel, waiting. The story was only just beginning, but for those who had already crossed paths with her, life was no longer as simple as it had been before she walked in that day. And the most dangerous part was that none of them, not the manager, not the silver-haired man, not even the young man with the viral video, knew just how deep this was about to go. The third day after the bank incident, the manager walked into work with a weight in his chest. The lobby looked the same. Polished floors, quiet hum of the air conditioner, but the mood felt different. People glanced at him longer than usual, and a few customers whispered when they thought he couldn't hear. The video was still spreading online, and now his name was starting to be mentioned in the comments. In his office, he closed the blinds and sat down at his desk. He had spent the past 2 nights replaying every detail of the encounter with the woman, trying to make sense of why the FBI had shown her that kind of respect. The more he thought about it, the more he regretted making that call. But it wasn't just guilt, it was fear. If she was someone powerful, someone connected to things above his understanding, then she might not be finished with him. Across the city, the woman sat in a plain apartment with the blinds half drawn. Her blazer was draped over a chair, and the folder lay open on the table. She wasn't alone. A man in his early 40s, with a faint scar across his cheek, leaned over the table, scanning the documents. "It's worse than I thought," he said, flipping to the last page. "This account isn't just money. It's tied to an operation." She didn't respond right away, instead sipping her coffee and staring at the street outside. "The manager saw me," she finally said. "He won't forget. And now the video." Her voice trailed off. The man frowned. "It's everywhere. Which means they've seen it too." Meanwhile, the silver-haired man from the bank, the one with the cane, was sitting in a small diner across town. He stirred his coffee slowly, his mind elsewhere. He had recognized her the moment she walked into the bank, though he had hoped he was wrong. Years ago, he had crossed paths with her during a government contract job. Back then, she wasn't wearing a blazer. She was wearing tactical gear, and her eyes carried the same calm, dangerous focus. If she was back now, it meant trouble was coming. He pulled a small notebook from his coat pocket and wrote down a name he hadn't spoken aloud in years. Then he slid the notebook back into his pocket and paid his bill, leaving the coffee untouched. Back at the bank, the manager's day took a stranger turn. Around noon, a man in a dark windbreaker walked in and asked for him by name. The manager hesitated before coming out from behind his desk. "Can I help you?" he asked cautiously. The man didn't smile. "You made a call to the FBI 3 days ago. We'd like to ask you some questions about it." The "we" wasn't explained. The man didn't show a badge, but something about his tone made the manager uneasy. He invited him into his office, but as soon as the door shut, the questions started. Not about the woman's appearance or her actions, but about what she might have said to the teller. The man seemed to be probing for details the manager didn't have. When the meeting ended, the man left without shaking his hand. As he watched him walk out, the manager noticed a black sedan pull up, the same one that had been spotted across the street 2 days earlier. The windbreaker man got in and they drove away. The young man who had posted the video was dealing with his own set of problems. His notifications were a constant stream of strangers asking for more footage, journalists requesting interviews, and anonymous accounts sending cryptic messages. One simply read, "Delete the video before it's too late." He wasn't sure if it was a threat or just a troll, but it made him uneasy, especially because one of the accounts that messaged him had no profile picture and no posts, just a single line in the bio. "We know where you filmed it." Back in her apartment, the woman was on a secure call. "The account is active," she said. "And it's moving. Someone is laundering through it, small amounts spread across different branches." The voice on the other end was calm but firm. "If they realize you're onto it, they'll make it disappear. You have to move now." She hung up and turned to the man with the scar. "We're going back to the bank." He raised an eyebrow. "That's risky. The manager will panic." "That's the point," she replied. At the same time, the silver-haired man left the diner and headed toward a payphone, one of the few still left in the city. He dialed a number from memory, one he hadn't used in over a decade. When the voice answered, he said only 5 words. "She's in play. It's begun." Then he hung up. By late afternoon, the black sedan was back outside the bank. The driver didn't get out this time, just sat there with the engine running. The manager noticed it again and felt a cold wave run through him. He didn't know who they were or what they wanted, but he knew it was connected to her. He considered calling the FBI again, but something told him that wouldn't help. If they had saluted her once, they weren't going to treat her like a suspect now. Whatever this was, it was bigger than him, bigger than the bank. That night, the city felt restless. Streetlights flickered in certain blocks, and the sound of sirens carried farther than usual. In her apartment, the woman packed the folder into a weathered briefcase, sliding a thin metal device into the side pocket. In another part of the city, the young man with the viral video finally decided to delete it from his account. But when he tried, an error message appeared. This content cannot be removed at this time. His stomach dropped. Someone else had control of it now. The silver-haired man didn't go home that night. Instead, he walked the river path until he reached an old warehouse. Inside, he lit a single lantern and pulled out his notebook again. On one page was the woman's name. On the next, a list of dates and locations, places where things had happened quietly, without making the news, but always leaving a mark. Somewhere in those pages was the reason she had returned. And if he was right, the events at the bank were only the first ripple in a much larger wave that was coming. The black sedan circled the block twice before disappearing into the night. But the feeling it left behind stayed. The bank, the manager, the silver-haired man, the young video poster. They were all now pieces on a board they didn't fully understand. And somewhere in the shadows, someone was moving the pieces toward a game none of them had agreed to play. By the next morning, the atmosphere around the bank had shifted into something almost electric. The employees felt it before the doors even opened, a kind of quiet pressure, as though something was hovering just beyond the glass. The manager came in early, hoping to get ahead of whatever was happening, but when he looked outside and saw the same black sedan idling across the street again, his chest tightened. Whoever was inside hadn't moved for hours, and he could feel their eyes on the building. The tellers tried to work as if nothing was wrong, but their glances toward the windows gave them away. Every customer who came in seemed to sense the tension. A woman depositing a check whispered to another customer, asking if this was the same bank from that FBI video. The whispering spread, and the manager could feel control of the room slipping through his fingers. At the same time, in a dim parking garage across town, the woman was loading the briefcase into the trunk of a plain gray car. The man with the scar stood beside her, glancing around the shadows. "Once we walk in there, there's no walking back out without someone noticing," he said. She shut the trunk with a firm click. "That's exactly what we need." The silver-haired man with the cane was also on the move. He left his small apartment with the same notebook tucked under his arm and made his way toward the bank. He wasn't going there to do business, he was going there to watch and maybe to intercept. He didn't know exactly what was about to happen, but every instinct told him it was going to happen there. The young man who had posted the video was pacing in his living room, his phone buzzing constantly. The anonymous messages had grown more urgent. The last one read, "You're part of it now. Get ready." He didn't know what it was, but when he peeked through his blinds, he thought he saw a figure leaning against a streetlight across the road, watching his building. By late morning, the tension reached its breaking point. The black sedan across from the bank was joined by a second vehicle, a white SUV with tinted windows. It parked 2 spaces behind the sedan, and for a while neither moved. People inside the bank noticed and whispered more urgently. The manager tried to calm his staff, but his voice didn't carry the same authority it once had. Then, without warning, the glass doors opened and the woman stepped inside. She wasn't alone. The man with the scar flanked her left, and behind them were 2 figures in dark coats who didn't look like ordinary agents. Every conversation in the bank stopped. Even the air seemed to pause. The manager's first instinct was to step back into his office, but she looked directly at him. "We need access to the account records," she said, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. He hesitated. I don't think I can authorize that without. Before he could finish, the two dark-coated figures moved toward the counter, producing identification that made the teller's eyes widen. Whatever was on those badges, it was enough to freeze everyone in place. The silver-haired man arrived just in time to see it from outside. He stayed by the doorway, pretending to fumble with his phone, but his eyes tracked every movement inside. When he saw her pull the briefcase onto the counter, his grip on the cane tightened. The man with the scar opened the briefcase just enough to reveal a set of documents and a small metal device, sleek, polished, and humming faintly. The woman slid one of the papers forward. "This account is linked to more than just money," she said, her voice carrying just enough for the manager to hear but not the customers. "If it's not stopped, it will trigger something you can't undo." From the far end of the lobby, one of the tellers noticed movement outside. The black sedan's driver had stepped out, and so had the man from the white SUV. They were walking toward the bank, their pace quick and deliberate. The young man with the viral video was already on his way, clutching his phone like a lifeline. Something told him he needed to be there, even if he didn't know why. He caught sight of the vehicles as he turned the corner and instinctively slowed his steps. Inside, the manager's voice wavered. You're saying this is connected to a... Don't finish that sentence, she interrupted sharply, her eyes locking on his. Some things are safer left unsaid in public. The glass doors swung open again. The two men from outside stepped in, scanning the room. Their eyes landed on the briefcase instantly. The air shifted, tighter, sharper. The woman didn't turn to look at them, but her shoulders stiffened. The man with the scar shifted subtly, putting himself between her and the newcomers. The silver-haired man stepped inside now, his cane clicking softly against the floor. He didn't speak, but his gaze moved from her to the men who had just entered. There was recognition there, and it wasn't friendly. The room felt ready to snap. The customers were frozen in place, the tellers holding their breath. The vehicles outside idled with engines running. Somewhere in the background, the faint hum of the metal device inside the briefcase seemed to grow louder, like it was waking up. The woman finally turned, meeting the eyes of the man closest to her. Her voice was low, but it carried across the room. "You're too late." The black sedan driver took another step forward. "We'll see about that." Every person in the room could feel it now, that something irreversible was seconds away from happening. The briefcase sat between them like a live fuse. The silver-haired man adjusted his grip on the cane, the young man with the viral video inched closer to the doorway, and the manager found himself caught between stepping back and stepping forward. And then, just as the tension reached its peak, the hum from the briefcase shifted into a sharper, faster pulse. The woman's hand hovered above it, the men in dark coats braced themselves, and no one in the room dared to breathe. The moment hung there, stretched tight, with everyone knowing that whatever happened next would change everything. Rain began to fall harder, drumming against the windows as if the world outside knew something was about to break. Inside, the air was heavy with unspoken truths, every glance loaded with suspicion. The old man's hands trembled as he reached into his coat, and for a moment everyone froze, half expecting him to pull out something that would change everything. But instead, he pulled out a small, weathered envelope. His voice cracked as he said it wasn't his secret to keep anymore, but before he could explain, the door swung open with a violent slam. A tall figure stepped in, soaked from the storm, eyes sharp and searching. They didn't speak at first, just scanned the room as if piecing together a puzzle they'd been chasing for years. The old man's expression shifted from fear to shock. He clearly knew this stranger. Everyone else stayed silent, the tension stretching so tight it felt like it could snap. The stranger finally spoke, saying they had been looking for the old man for a long time, and that he held the one piece of evidence that could clear or condemn someone's name forever. The envelope in his hands suddenly became more than paper. It was now the center of everything. But before he could hand it over, a loud crash came from the back of the building, followed by hurried footsteps. Shadows moved against the dim light, and the storm outside howled as if trying to drown out the chaos inside. The stranger's eyes narrowed, realizing they weren't the only ones who had come for the truth. Every second felt heavier, every sound sharper. The group stood caught between fear and curiosity, knowing that whatever happened next would change all of their lives. The old man clutched the envelope tighter, glancing toward the noise, then back at the stranger. His voice was low but urgent when he said, "It's not safe here, they found us. If you want, I can now take this exact scene and carry it forward into the full climax so the tension explodes in the next part." Daniel's heart pounded as he stepped into the dimly lit back room, the air thick with dust and tension. The metal door clanged shut behind him, locking automatically. His eyes darted across the shadows until they landed on Lila, her small frame trembling but her gaze steady. She wasn't alone. Vincent Kingsley stood beside her, his face pale, but his eyes burning with a mix of anger and desperation. For a moment, Daniel couldn't speak. The truth had been circling him for days, but now it stood right in front of him. Vincent wasn't there to take his daughter back. He was there to protect her. "You think I'm your enemy," Vincent said quietly, "but there's someone far worse. Someone inside my own company who's been using Lila as leverage." Before Daniel could respond, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the corridor. The door rattled violently, and a voice hissed from the other side. "You have 30 seconds. Vincent pulled a small flash drive from his pocket and pressed it into Daniel's hand. "This has everything: names, accounts, evidence. Get Lila out. If they catch me, they'll assume you ran the other way." His voice was calm, but his hand trembled. Daniel grabbed Lila's hand, his mind racing. "Come with us," he urged. But Vincent shook his head, eyes flicking to the door. "If I leave now, they'll hunt you both harder. If I stay, they'll think you're gone for good." The door burst open, and 3 men in dark suits flooded the room. Vincent stepped forward, shielding Daniel and Lila. "Go," he barked. Daniel didn't want to leave, but Lila tugged at his arm, tears brimming. They slipped through a side exit Vincent had unlocked moments before, disappearing into the night. Outside, the rain poured down in sheets, masking their footsteps. They reached Daniel's truck, but just as they were about to drive off, Lila turned to him and whispered, "There's something I never told you. I'm not just Vincent's daughter. I'm the only one who knows where he hid the rest of the evidence. Without me, they'll never find it, but if they do, they'll destroy everything." Daniel gripped the steering wheel, the engine rumbling under his hands. The truth hit him like a punch. The danger wasn't over. If anything, it had only just begun. Do you want me to continue into the final twist reveal that explains Lila's secret and Vincent's real plan? That would give this climax an even stronger punch. Thomas stood frozen for a moment, his hands still holding the edges of the worn blanket as if it carried the weight of everything that had happened. The night had felt endless, filled with worry, small acts of kindness, and the kind of silence that lets you hear your own thoughts. Sasha, the dog he had given his last blanket to, lay beside him now, her head resting on his knee. Her breathing was slow and steady, the kind that comes only when a heart finally feels safe. Thomas couldn't help but think back to that freezing night when their paths had crossed. A night where he had nothing to give except warmth, and he gave it anyway. Morning light crept across the alley, touching the corners of the old buildings and brushing over the two of them like a quiet promise. It was a new day, and although Thomas didn't know what it would bring, it didn't feel as heavy as the days before. He gently scratched Sasha's head, and she nudged closer, her tail thumping lightly against his leg. Somewhere deep inside he felt a shift. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking only about surviving. He was thinking about someone else's tomorrow. It wasn't long before the woman from the rescue center returned. Her name was Emily, and she had been the one who spotted them that night. She knelt down beside Sasha and smiled at Thomas, her eyes soft with gratitude. "She looks so much better," Emily said, reaching out to pet the dog. Thomas nodded, a faint smile pulling at his lips. "She's strong," he replied quietly. "She just needed someone to believe that." Emily looked at him for a moment, as if she was seeing more than just a man in worn clothes and tired eyes. "So do you," she said softly. Emily didn't leave right away. She brought them both breakfast, real food, warm and fresh, and stayed to talk. Thomas had long forgotten what it felt like to be part of a normal conversation, one without pity or suspicion. Emily told him about the rescue center and the people who worked there. She spoke about Sasha's condition and how they had been looking for her for weeks, worried she wouldn't make it. Thomas listened, his hands wrapped around the coffee cup she had given him, feeling the heat seep into his fingers. When Emily finally stood to leave, she hesitated. "Thomas, we could use someone like you at the center. You clearly have a way with animals." He stared at her, unsure if she was serious. "I don't have much experience," he admitted. She smiled. "You have the most important kind, compassion. We can teach the rest." The offer stayed with him long after she left. That night, as he lay beside Sasha under the faded streetlight, he thought about what it would mean. It wasn't just a job, it was a chance to start again, to wake up with a reason to keep going. He looked down at Sasha, who was watching him with eyes that held the same question. Maybe, he thought, they were both meant to be found that night. The next day, Thomas made the walk to the rescue center. The building was small but bright, with the sound of barking and soft voices coming from inside. Emily greeted him with a grin and handed him a volunteer badge. "Let's start simple," she said, leading him to a pen with a small group of dogs who wagged their tails wildly at the sight of him. For the first time in years, Thomas felt something loosen in his chest. He laughed, a real laugh, when one of the dogs tried to climb into his lap. Days turned into weeks. Thomas learned how to feed, groom, and care for the animals. He watched Sasha heal completely, her coat growing glossy, her steps quick and full of life. People began to notice the bond between them, the way Sasha always found him in a crowd, as if making sure he was still there. The center became more than a shelter. It became a place where both of them belonged. One afternoon, Emily approached Thomas with an envelope. "Someone dropped this off for you," she said. Inside was a note written in neat handwriting. "Kindness given freely never disappears. You gave it to her, and now it's coming back to you." Along with the note was a gift card to a local store, enough to buy new clothes and supplies. Thomas stared at it, overwhelmed. He had no idea who had sent it, but he knew what it meant. People had noticed. Months later, Sasha was officially adopted. Not by a stranger, but by Thomas himself. With the help of the rescue center, he had found a small apartment nearby. It wasn't much, but it was warm, safe, and theirs. He still worked at the center, now as a full-time staff member. Every day he saw animals arrive scared and broken, and every day he worked to show them what Sasha had taught him, that trust could be rebuilt and life could start over, no matter how far you'd fallen. On quiet evenings, Thomas would sit on his little balcony with Sasha curled at his feet, watching the sunset over the city. He thought about the man he had been before that cold night, the man who thought he had nothing left to give. Now he understood something he never had before. Giving isn't about how much you have, but how much of yourself you're willing to share. Sometimes people from the neighborhood would stop to say hello, curious about the man with a loyal dog always by his side. And Thomas would smile, telling them Sasha's story. Not to gain sympathy, but to remind them that even the smallest act of kindness could change everything. The streets still held their shadows, and life was far from perfect, but Thomas no longer walked them alone. He had purpose, a place, and a companion who had once been a stranger shivering in the dark. In a way, they had saved each other. And in that truth, there was a quiet, lasting peace. Kindness had found its way back to him, and he had no intention of letting it go.